Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our podcast channel here on Digital Creed. I'm Brian Pereira, and I'll be your host. It's late February 2021, and I'm still working from my home in Mumbai. So, this is yet another remote interview recording, though I wish we were all together in the studio. Please join me in welcoming my guest today. He is Mr. Karan Kirpalani, Vice President, Products and Services at NetMagic, an NTT company. Welcome, Karan. Good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Brian. I'm very happy to be here. It's good to be able to talk with you, and I hope you're well.
Yes, we are all well here. Would you like to say a few opening lines for our listeners, please?
Well, to begin with, at the outset, I hope everyone tuning in is well, they're safe. In different parts of the country, we're hearing rumblings that we might be headed for, some sort of a lockdown again. I hope that isn't the case. In that light, in light of that possible development, I hope everyone's well, keeping safe, trying to keep as much distance as possible, wearing a mask, and hopefully we can all get out of this soon.
So, Karan, are you back in the office or are you also working from home?
No, I think NTT and all the group companies that Magic included, they've taken a very employee-first approach to having non-essential data center staff working from home. We're on calls at all hours of the day, but it's only the essential staff that need to be physically present within the data centers who are going in, but the rest of us are all working remotely.
Wow. Okay. Same here. And in fact, it's extended hours for me. But I'm enjoying
it is for everybody as well.
Yeah, but I'm enjoying my work thoroughly.
Same here.
Yeah. Karan joined NetMagic when the company was in its nascent stage. Headquartered in Mumbai, NTT NetMagic is India's leading managed hosting and hybrid multi-cloud solution provider, serving more than 2,500 clients globally. They build some of the finest data centers in India, and I have had the privilege of visiting their data centers in Mumbai. Karan has played two pivotal roles for nearly 2 decades and has been part of the core team of the organization, wearing many hats, from business development to product management and product marketing. Prior to NetMagic, Karan was associated with the ICICI Bank as part of the online content and web applications team. Karan is dedicated to do what he does, and business insights makes him a visionary and thought leader in the field. He's an avid reader and he has written many articles, white papers, blogs, and various technologies, and I've also heard him speak at public events. It has been exactly a year since the world was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. This global catastrophe impacted not only our lives, but also the business world. Many businesses had to close shop because they could not sustain and remodel. With lockdowns and social distancing, businesses had to take a no-touch, no-contact approach, and hence operations were increasingly digitalized. That led to massive cloud adoption. So Karan, how did NTT NetMagic prepare for this kind of unexpected demand for cloud services? And how did you help your customers with business continuity in the early days of the pandemic?
Brian, that's a very good question. Cloud and data center providers are inherently geared to protect against disruption in their business by design. Our facilities in India and around the world are resilient and automated by design. And that obviously goes a very long way in ensuring that we, as a service provider, can cope with disruptions like a global pandemic. Having said that, you raise an interesting point when you talk about increased cloud adoption being one of the many domino effects of this unprecedented situation the world finds itself in. I think what's interesting is that cloud adoption was already steadily accelerating even prior to the pandemic, thanks to a multitude of factors, increasing hybrid cloud adoption, digital transformation initiatives, data center repatriation to the cloud, workloads like SAP moving from on-premise to the cloud. But COVID-19 has acted as an accelerant or a catalyst, if you will, to speed up these initiatives across organizations of all shapes and sizes. Part of it is obviously due to the resiliency that cloud can offer, but another part of it is that COVID-19's also led to a skills shortage as organizations across segments, across industries have lost some of their staff strength. To your question about business continuity, I think there's a two-part answer there. Firstly, Entity NetMagic, and for that matter, all leading cloud providers ensure that their services are resilient and secure by design so that they can withstand tremendous spikes in demand and still ensure high levels of availability, performance, and security. This is something by definition that is much more difficult and expensive for organizations to replicate in-house. Secondly, when it comes to true disaster recovery and business continuity, a hybrid cloud model actually provides much higher ROI for our clients. Being able to provide what's called cold DR, for example, where clients pay virtually no or they pay virtually zero for their DR site until they actually use it, significantly lowers the entry barriers to effective disaster recovery and business continuity. That's something that we've invested in significantly. And needless to say, there's been a significant uptake in those services in the recent past.
So a follow-up question on that, Karan, you said code DR or is it core DR?
So cold disaster recovery. Cold disaster recovery denotes that the traditional model of disaster recovery meant that you ran your production and disaster sites simultaneously. Even if the disaster site didn't run at full capacity, it ran at a significant level of capacity when looked at as a percentage of the capacity that you had on your production site. So it ran at anything between 50% to 100%. Sometimes it's even a 1:1 replication of what your production site capacity is. And obviously, then you're more than doubling your cost, because if you need X infrastructure on your primary side, you need the same X infrastructure on the disaster recovery side. Plus, you need to tack on, connectivity between both locations. You need to add the cost of replication and DR tools. So you were looking at anywhere between 100 and 150% increase in what your normal operating production costs were if you wanted to have a viable, meaningful disaster with, acceptable RTO and RPO based on your business objectives. With cold DR, you're able to run your DR site at near zero levels of consumption, except when you either do a drill once every quarter, once every 6 months, whatever it is, or in the event of a disaster at your production site and you do need to switch over to the disaster site, that's when the infrastructure ramps up significantly and you only use it based on the time, or you only pay for it based on what your consumption is. When your primary site is restored, then you cut back over to the primary site and you switch off the DR site again. That's what we're seeing in the recent past. That's what cold DR is. The site is cold when it's not being used, and that brings your DR budgets down by 75%, 80%, 90%. So cold DR is something that we've invested in significantly in the recent past. And obviously, considering what the world's been through in the last 12 months, there's a significant appetite for organizations to implement a viable, meaningful DR solution.
Yeah, so two things I pick up from that long answer. One is that the organizations are going to be saving a tremendous cost here because they are not using the secondary site right through and all the time. And the second thing that I'm picking up here is that, and I'm wondering, is that if it is a cold DR site, is it going to be synchronizing all the data in real time or only at that time, like closer to when you're using the DR site?
So there's two methods of synchronization when it comes to disaster recovery. There's asynchronous, which happens at predetermined defined intervals based on business requirements. And then there's synchronous replication, where the data center, where it's, the data is synced constantly. Now, given modern tools, modern technologies, storage replication, database replication, asynchronous replication provides the much more viable method to do it, both from a cost perspective as well as from a capabilities, skills, tools, network availability. All when you look at all of those different factors, asynchronous is really the way to go. It's done at predetermined times. It could be done at certain hours of the day when the infrastructure, primary infrastructure, is not being used by business users. So middle of the night, for example, low utilization periods, that's when you typically tend to do your data replication.
So moving on, let's talk about some of the other applications and workloads that are driving the increased adoption of hybrid cloud.
Well, there's a lot of applications that are actually driving cloud adoption. Some are driving public cloud adoption, some drive private cloud adoption, although most organizations today have adopted a hybrid cloud strategy because it's the best choice when it comes to ensuring the right mix of security, agility, performance, and cost efficiency. I think more important than the applications, though, are the use cases. Some of the common use cases we're seeing are IT infrastructure and application modernization, hybrid IT initiatives, the agility and flexibility that comes from software-defined infrastructure, the cost benefits that come from no upfront investment and consumption-based billing, the growing need to use new generation technologies like microservices or serverless computing, and finally the scalability and elasticity that hybrid cloud offers. These are some of the use cases that are actually driving cloud adoption quite significantly. But if you want to talk about the applications, there are the usual suspects. So SAP HANA has obviously driven cloud adoption significantly. Our SAP HANA TDI platform continues to see robust growth, as do our public cloud and virtual private cloud platforms. Big data and analytics is also maturing and driving cloud adoption quite significantly, as are database analytics, web content, hosting, and of course, IoT workloads.
Okay, since you mentioned data analytics and you mentioned SAP HANA, I'd like to ask you what kind of business scenarios do you see for using SAP HANA and data analytics these days? Is it coming more from the banking and financial sector, for instance?
So that's a very good question. So let's begin by looking at the three V's of big data, right? So you have velocity, which is how quickly can you evaluate and analyze data. You have variety, which is how quickly can you bring together previously siloed data streams to illuminate new patterns, and volume, which is how big a data set can you analyze to get meaningful analytics out of. I imagine the short answer is that SAP HANA is a big shift forward across all three of these parameters. The ability of in-memory computing to manage very large amounts of data in real time has revolutionized the way businesses analyze and report on metrics, trends, and performance. Organizations can now consider more granular data, they can execute more complex analyses, and run reports faster and more frequently. But I think it turns out that faster, more detailed, and more powerful is just the beginning. You can use SAP HANA's in-memory database technology to solve, entirely new categories of complex business problems. Even when working with large volumes of data, a multitude of independent and dependent variables, time-sensitive material, and a whole host of other complexities. HANA is a significant, leap forward in terms of how it can handle the job as compared to previous platforms. Your typical people adopting it, will be organizations that have, manufacturing processes. Now, these typically go across segments, they go across verticals, but the manufacturing industry or the manufacturing vertical is really at the forefront of HANA adoption. They have been for a while because, as you know, SAP is retiring ECC. I think organizations have until 2023 or 2024, I forget the exact date, after which I think ECC will be end of life. So, and a shift on SAP is a very large, complex thing. It involves retooling your backend processes. So it's typically a long, drawn-out migration to move from one platform to another. It's been going on for a while, and that it will continue to go on for at least the next couple of years as organizations move completely over to HANA.
Okay, moving on, let's talk about some of the customers and the consumers of all these cloud services. Firstly, I'd like to talk about small and medium businesses, which are a major contributor to India's GDP, as we know. And last year, particularly, we have seen that a lot of these small and medium businesses were taking to the cloud very rapidly. You know, cloud plays a very significant part in their business models, their business expansions. So the question here is, how can these small and medium businesses really leverage the cloud to scale up? And how are you helping them?
So the short answer is that SMEs are probably best positioned to leverage the cloud to scale and expand their digital transformation initiatives. Having said that, a recently published 451 research report shows that cloud adoption is increasing across the board. Over the next 18 months, all analysts will tell you that we're going to see a significant uptake in public, private, and hybrid cloud adoption and a corresponding decrease in on-premise non-cloud infrastructure. But to your point, let's talk specifically about SMEs. So to begin with, SMEs have less existing investment in their, existing non-cloud landscape than large organizations. A large organization like a bank, for example, may have made significant investment in on-premise or private cloud infrastructure that they're still amortizing. They tend to recover the cost of their infrastructure over 5 years. SMEs, on the other hand, are actually less encumbered by these kinds of investments and can be a lot more agile when it comes to re-architecting or refactoring their applications for a move to the cloud. Secondly, we all see that SMEs have more of a challenger mentality where they're willing to be more agile, to move quicker, and are consequently more willing to adopt newer tools and technologies in order to gain a competitive edge over their larger, more established peers. Having said that, there are pitfalls to consider though, right? Cloud is a business imperative, so it's critical that organizations have the wherewithal, they have the knowledge and the understanding of how to seamlessly move to the cloud. Migration can be extremely complex, which is why NetMagic has a successful 4-step approach to help organizations with their cloud journey. It begins with consultation, moves on to migrate, design, and execute, then moves on to build, and then finally capped off with a cycle of continuous innovation and optimization.
Now moving on to a discussion about data centers, which is really powering the cloud, the infrastructure part. Karan, I'm observing that there are some new kind of customers for data centers in the last few years. They're called the hyperscaler customers who go in for co-location kind of services. Are you also seeing that kind of business coming in for NTT NetMagic, and how exactly would you define hyperscalers?
Well, so weirdly, what I've been noticing is, I think the term hyperscaler seems to be, people are now using just cloud provider or cloud service provider as compared to, people calling it hyperscalers. But it's always challenging to keep up with how quickly these terms come and go. But to your question, in simple terms, a hyperscale company is any company that is absolutely gargantuan in size. I think there's only 24 of these behemoths in the world across all industries in total, right? 24 hyperscale companies, the Googles, the Apples of the world, all of them. But when it comes to cloud specifically, the 3 hyperscalers are, of course, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Each one of them has massive scale. They have a wide breadth of services, and they all invest extremely heavily in cloud engineering and development. So even though NTT is a global giant within its own right, it makes sense for us to have strategic partnerships and collaborations with all of these companies to augment our own cloud capabilities and to offer a compelling managed high cloud offering to our customers. So you're correct in terms of the fact that these so-called hyperscalers are the ones that are driving data center demand because sometimes they choose to work with an existing established leader in the data center space rather than to build out their own facilities, because that may not necessarily be their core focus or their core competence. But I'm not at liberty to actually get into the details of to what extent they work with us. But you are correct when you say that hyperscalers are really driving data center capacity expansion.
Now, experts are predicting that data center capacity requirements will scale by a factor of 10x in the next 5 to 7 years. For instance, today we are at 400 megawatts, but they talk about 1200 megawatts and 1000 megawatts capacity utilization. That's an aggregate figure in 5 to 7 years. How is Entity NetMagic preparing to meet this enormous demand? And would you be able to tell us about your growth plans?
So, to be honest with you, even if you had said that they were growing 15 or 20x, I wouldn't be surprised. That's the sheer demand for data centers over the last several years, and it only shows signs of accelerating further. Now, NetMagic is obviously part of the Entity Group, and as such, we've got over 160 data centers around the world and a floor space of over 500,000 square meters, or 5.4 million square feet. And that's a figure that's continuously growing as we increase our data center footprint to meet growing demand. Within India, NetMagic is a leader in terms of data center capacity. And yes, we're expanding, this already pan-India footprint we have very, very aggressively to be able to keep pace with the demand that we're seeing, not just from hyperscalers, but across segments and across verticals as people move more to the cloud. One of the trends that we're seeing, and most analysts will agree on this as well, is one of the things that's driving cloud adoption is this trend called data center repatriation, where clients who had moved, or who had their on-premise, non-cloud, or even cloud running on-premise, have decided that frankly it's not worth it for them to invest in their own data centers. So organizations typically find that as time goes by, it's not worth it for them to continue with those facilities. They're better off repurposing that area for business growth and focus on their core business activities. Also, they're never able to deliver the same kind of operational efficiencies that a specialist, highly sophisticated, cutting-edge data center like the kinds that we provide, they're not able to do that. They're not able to deliver the same PU levels. They're not able to deliver the same cooling efficiencies, the same power utilization efficiencies. It's just not possible for them. We operate at a certain level of scale and a certain level of sophistication. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars. Entity is committed to, I think, investing close to $2 billion in India alone over the next few years in terms of data center. And a lot of that is not just in terms of rolling out new facilities, it's also in terms of adopting new state-of-the-art technology to make sure that these data centers operate at the highest levels of efficiency. Your typical organization, even if it's a large organization that's running a captive or an on-premise data center, they're not able to do that. It's just absurd to even expect them to maintain that same level of efficiency. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of these companies are downsizing or even completely retiring their on-premise captive data centers and moving that infrastructure or moving those workloads into the cloud or into a provider's data center.
Yeah, and that is one of the reasons why the building capacity gets utilized so quickly. Karan, I've been visiting these data centers and speaking to the people who manage the data centers, and they tell me that in a few months their buildings are already fully utilized, and they have to start constructing the second building and so on. So I think now it's no longer about constructing a single building. You have to think about a park, a data center park. Is that right?
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, it's not even sometimes a few months after the facility is ready. Sometimes the data center is even almost completely sold out before the facility is even operational, right? You're absolutely correct on all fronts. You've seen that in the news recently. We made a sizable investment to acquire a 6 acre plot in Greater Noida for a new state-of-the-art data center park. We plan on investing somewhere near $2 billion over the next 4 years to expand our data center business in India. And in that vein, we also recently launched a new high density data center in Mumbai, taking us to 10 data centers currently across the country. India, of course, has been a key market for Entity Limited's global data center portfolio. Organizations today demand an ever-expanding global platform to reach their growing digital business objectives, and being able to provide them with a globally consistent data center and cloud service is critical to their success. So that's why we continue to expand our portfolio of state-of-the-art data centers in new and existing markets to support our clients as their demand increases for reliable, robust cloud services, cloud communications, digital infrastructure, and other newer technologies.
So with all that investment coming in for new data centers, India surely has a very bright future, as a kind of a data center capital, if I may say so, of the world. There are also other companies in India making those billion-dollar investments.
There are, yes.
So Karan, I want to thank you for this stimulating discussion. I'm sure our listeners are loving it. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much, Karan.
Thanks so much, Brian. It was my pleasure as well to be here. We really enjoyed these conversations with you.
Well, that was Karan Kirpalani, Vice President Products and Services, NetMagic, an NTT company.